And it was really sink or swim, and at one point I'd considered just packing it in because I didn't think I was ready for it. And then I thought, you know what, what's the worst that could happen?
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. We all know that chefing is the great global vocation with skills learnt on the tools adaptable to just about any kitchen on earth. But commercial kitchens and restaurants are not necessarily the only avenue for a career as a chef. Josh Harris is the head chef of Kilcoy Global Foods. Josh, how are you?
Oh, well, Huck, how are you, mate?
I'm good. It's good to get you on the show. You're a busy man these days and out of restaurants in a way, but still in food and still in a chef role. I'm intrigued to know what you're up to.
Yeah, mate. So I'm the head chef for Kilcoy Global Foods, a beef manufacturer. Our head office is on the Sunshine Coast, and I have the privilege of working with some of the most incredible beef in the world on a daily basis. So I'm truly blessed.
What does your role encompass? Are you still cooking sometimes and sort of exploring culinary avenues for the company? What's the role?
Yeah, most definitely. I suppose my role is a super interesting role. It changes every day. It's every day is different in the kitchen here, which is great. So I work closely with our new product development team, do a lot of research and development, coming up with sort of new innovations and products. We also host internal events. We might have some of our customers from around the world come in to our amazing facility here on the Sunshine Coast. We do have an amazing kitchen and restaurant type setup in our corporate head office. So I'll cook for those guys when they come through, and we also film a lot of our social media content for a number of our brands in this same kitchen as well. So one of the beauties of my job, Huck, is that every day is different. You're not pumping out the same menu for a similar number of covers every day. It's really exciting and rather unique.
Tell us about your cooking in that environment. Is it a little bit different? Like how do you plan sort of a menu and sort of showcase the product as compared to your long career as a chef, which we'll get into shortly?
Yeah, it's completely different. I mean, it's very much a one-man band in the kitchen here. I'm very lucky. I do have a great assistant that helps me with sort of the front of house and the running of our what's called the innovation hub here at the head office. But it depends on who's coming through as to what they want to look at. It might be an existing customer that want to sort of branch out and try new products. So we need to sort of understand what they're after and try and tailor make some certain products for them. It could be just bringing a very good customer in and wanting to really put on a great dinner or a great lunch for them and really showcase our incredible Wagyu or Black Angus products as well. So, it depends on who the guest is into the hub as to how we sort of tailor that menu for them.
Tell us a little bit about the beef. You mentioned Black Angus and Wagyu. Have you spent time on the farm? Can you tell us a bit about the beef and what's so good about it?
Yeah, I haven't spent a great deal of time at the feedlots and the farms where our products come from. And I've spent a lot of time on cattle farms previously. My wife's family have cattle, and some of her family down in Victoria have some amazing cattle as well. So, I'm no stranger to that sort of environment. But I mean, I think for me, getting back to the provenance of our product, where it comes from, how it's treated and processed, is very important. It's a very sustainable practice here with this company. I've spent a fair bit of time in our processing facility at Kilcoy as well, and it's nothing short of amazing sort of what's done out there, not just in volume, but also, again, every part of the animal is used. Nothing goes to waste, which, in this day and age, the whole sort of nose to tail ethos, mate, that you'd be familiar with, and a lot of chefs are, it's very important. So, I'm very proud to work with a company that values that extremely highly.
From a chefing and culinary perspective, what's special about the different products, the beef that you have?
I think we've got everything from, your entry-level 100-day grain-fed products right the way through to, 9-score plus, pure blood Wagyu and everything in between. So, like I mentioned before, I'm very spoiled that I have access to some of the best beef in the world. I think some of my favourites would be, for example, our Black Angus short ribs. are exceptional on the smoker, right through to our loin cuts in the Wagyu range as well. So, the marbling in these products is nothing short of exceptional. Even in the Angus itself, some of the Angus products come through, and occasionally in different cuts you could be mistaken for thinking that it's actually Wagyu. So, I think that one of the things that gets me excited coming to work every day is the fact that I know, regardless of what I'm cooking with, I'm just going to get my hands on some phenomenal produce, which makes me a very, very lucky chef,
Well, I want to talk about that a bit more in detail later on, but you have had a long career as a chef before jumping into this role. Take us back to when you were young. Whereabouts did you grow up, and did food play a big role in your family?
Look, I was born in Sydney, moved to Brisbane when I was very young. I started school in Brisbane, spent most of my life in Brisbane. So, and, I come from your everyday regular Australian family. There wasn't a lot of, food culture growing up. My mum does a mean Sunday roast. And my grandmother's corned beef plays that's always sort of ringing in my mind as a vivid memory. But little things, mate, like Christmas time for me as a kid growing up, my aunt would always turn up with the most incredible Aberdeen sausage. Like, people are going back for seconds with the prawns and potatoes and whatever else, but I'd basically just perch myself next to her and this incredible Aberdeen sausage. So, little things like that stick out in my mind. Obviously someone with an ethnic background or a more culturally diverse background would have these memories of food being a very important part of their childhood. But it wasn't until I was a little bit older that I really got excited about food and wanted to pursue a career in it.
Well, tell us about that moment. What sort of triggered that, and what was it like sort of stepping into the industry for the first time?
Mate, I think, when I was a teenager, like many teenagers, I got a job at a fast food restaurant, which, I think is actually a really good place for young chefs and young people to start. It teaches you about the hustle and bustle. It teaches you about organisation, time management and that sort of thing. And it wasn't until I was 20 or 21 I moved to London, and just by default, my job at the time actually, sort of the company I was working for, I'm a painter by trade as well. That I pursued that for a little while when I was much younger and didn't really know what I wanted to do. So, that sort of work dried up a little bit, and I just approached a local restaurant in southwest London looking for a job as a glassy or front of house, whatever else. And mate, the chefs were on a break one day, and I'd been keeping a close eye on what the kitchen was doing because I'd worked in cafes and whatever else in Brisbane prior. A couple of customers walked through, and I ended up just rattling a few pans, got their orders out, and the head chef came back and sort of stood at a distance and watched, and he said, "Right, that's it for you out the front, mate. You're in the kitchen with us now." So, and I think working in that fast-paced environment in a very busy London restaurant just gave me the bug. When I moved back to Brisbane at the end of 2009, and I fell into a place called Baguette Bistro, which, for anyone that has dined out in Brisbane over the years would know that Baguette was a very iconic institution in the Brisbane dining scene, and I was very fortunate enough to formalise my trade there and worked with an incredible team.
Do you have any stories of your days at Baguette Bistro and sort of things you took away from that time?
Oh, man, there's plenty of stories from Baguette that ring very, very true. But I think the team and the kitchen we had at Baguette back in those days, mate, was probably one of the best teams I've ever worked with. My head chef at the time, Graham Waddell, is still an incredible chef. He and his wife Sarah, who was the sous chef at the time, are still to this day some of my closest mates. And I think it was the culture and the camaraderie that really gave me the bug. That whole chef life sort of ethos was amazing. We put up incredible food. We worked hard. We played hard as well, obviously, like a lot of chefs did. So, but Baguette for me, mate, was especially learning about offal. That for me, Graham's food costs, sort of going back 15 plus years, were always incredible because he was really big on offal. That's where I really learned and grew an appreciation for the whole nose to tail ethos, and learning how to treat things like tongue and cheek and tripe and that sort of thing. Lamb's brains was phenomenal. So, I'm very grateful for that. And in turn, that's done me a lot of favours in my current role as well. It's not always about putting a nice shiny Wagyu strip loin on a plate here. I get to use all the parts of the beast here, and that knowledge and experience is largely thanks to my time at Baguette.
You've had a lot of roles running kitchens in head chef and executive chef roles. What was your first sort of head chef gig, and what was it like stepping into those shoes?
My first head chef role was at a place in Brisbane called Era Bistro. Era Bistro was another very iconic and well-known restaurant. At the time, I was working under a gentleman by the name of Marcus Turner, probably one of the most skillful and creative chefs I think I've ever worked with. Marcus left the business to pursue other endeavours, and I just sort of fell into the role as head chef at a busy time of year because a few people had left at the same time, and it was really sink or swim, and at one point I'd considered just packing it in because I didn't think I was ready for it. And then I thought, what's the worst that could happen? And Era Bistro used to be a two-hatted restaurant. When I started there, they didn't have any hats. And then I think through hard work and determination, it was my first menu as the head chef there. We regained the two-hat status again, which was phenomenal. So that was a learning curve. It was terrifying. It was, exciting, a very mixed bag of emotions. But that really cemented my career for what was to come.
Is there any dishes from that period of time that really spoke of your food at Era Bistro that you can tell us about?
Yeah, there was one. I mean, hanger steak for me, the thick skirt is a very underrated cut of meat, and I had a dish on the menu there that was rather adventurous. We had hanger steak with garlic snails and a gingerbread sauce that I thought was, at the time, I mean, looking back at it now, I just think, what were you thinking, mate? But at the time, it ate really well. It was popular, and that dish for me sort of hung around for a while. As did the pork terrine, So those two dishes, they stand out in my mind for a couple of reasons. One was very out there and adventurous, but worked, and the other was a classic that I spent a lot of time on making perfect, that everybody appreciated.
What was it like for you personally, sort of having that sort of creativity outlet, but being responsible for a team and the direction of a restaurant as well? Did it change your approach to your craft?
100%. I think, as a young head chef that you may think you're not quite ready for it yet, you had no choice but to put a lot of trust in your crew, and I think, learning to be a leader and a manager, and also learning how to delegate responsibly, was something that really I was forced to learn quite quickly, and even back in those days, we're going back not quite 15 years, staffing levels were challenging back then as well. Fortunately, the venues I worked in were well-respected establishments, so people wanted to work there. So you really had to, learn the skills and the shortfalls of your team, and delegate jobs accordingly. So service ran smoothly, your prep time was efficient. So yeah, it's a very important part of being a manager, is learning the strengths and weaknesses of your team and knowing how to delegate properly.
You spent a couple of years as executive chef at Capri by Fraser. Tell us about that experience.
That was a phenomenal learning curve as well. Going from sort of small restaurants into large hotels was, again, another daunting experience. When you mention these things, Huck, I look back and go, wow, I basically was just chasing a daunting experience after another, really. Pardon me. But, the opportunity came up to work there. That was under the the leadership and consultancy of Pete Evans, who did a lot for me as a chef and as a person. But that was a huge learning curve. A larger team, multiple outlet sort of venue with, the restaurant, in-room dining, functions, all the rest of it was a great experience and taught me a lot of valuable skills as well, vastly improved my time management and all that sort of thing. So, that was a great place to work. I'm still in contact with the GM from there and my food and beverage manager and a bunch of the guys that we became very close to.
Port Lincoln is known for its extraordinary seafood, arguably the best place in Australia for seafood, if you ask some. But it's not got the greatest restaurants in regional Australia. Well, what lured you down there and what was that like?
Well, it actually ties into the Capri by Fraser experience. As I said, I was with Pete Evans there, and Pete had an opportunity to also take on a consultancy role for a gentleman in Port Lincoln by the name of Peter Teakle, who was a local entrepreneur. Teakle made his millions printing wine labels, of all things. And Peter Teakle purchased an old sort of somewhat rundown winery in Port Lincoln and wanted to build, a world-class restaurant on this winery. And Pete Evans had met Peter Teakle on his fishing boat some years prior, and they kept in touch. So Teakle called Evans and said, "Look, mate, I'm opening a restaurant. I need your help." And Pete actually called me and said, "Mate, how would you feel about a move to regional South Australia?" So literally a funny thing, my wife and I had been to an auction for a house that morning, and we're head over heels for the house. Thought we're going to buy this. Bidding got a little bit silly. We missed out. We were a bit down in the dumps, and literally about an hour later, Pete Evans called and said, "Mate, how about Port Lincoln?" The stars had aligned. It was clearly meant to be. And my wife and I, now then 6-month-old son, took a trip down there for a weekend to go and meet the team and have a look around, and we instantly fell in love. And as you said, mate, I think it's one of the seafood capitals of the world. Cold water seafood for me is exceptional, but it's not just the seafood that Port Lincoln and the Eyre Peninsula is renowned for. And we actually decided to put limitations on our menus at the restaurant there, that we would only serve products from the Eyre Peninsula, so nothing was sourced outside of the EP, which was a pretty bold move. But when you realise just how rich that part of the world is with incredible produce, it actually became very easy to produce great dishes from that amazing produce.
With access to seafood, like literally out of the water there, did your sort of understanding of seafood and use of it change in that manner?
Oh, massively. I got to work with products that I'd never seen before, let alone cooked with. But the freshness for me was also remarkable. There is such a thing as too fresh when it comes to certain fish. Some products I'd actually need to leave in the cold room for a couple of days. Some of the product was that fresh, made that rigor mortis hadn't even set in. I was literally, I had fishermen calling me whilst they're at the helm on their way back to the boat ramp saying, "Mate, meet us at the boat ramp in half an hour. You can pick what I've just caught." So, there's a lot of unique products that come out of the Eyre Peninsula, and things like razor fish, which is like a razor. I can't remember the name for it. It's like a fan shell razor clam, I think it's called. Very, very unique product. I think we're only the second or third restaurant in Australia to actually use that product on a menu. And another product that we had down there was the Greenlee Island Kawahagi, which was it's like a deep sea ocean jacket, part of the leather jacket family, and the cheeks are very sought after off that fish. And I remember I had the pleasure of meeting the fisherman, a gentleman by the name of Hugh Bailey, was introduced to me through a good friend, Gavin Myers from Myers Seafood. And these snouts were being cut off the fish, taken back to the mainland, and then the cheeks were sort of then trimmed or taken off the snouts. And I looked at Hugh and I said, "Can I just take the whole snout? Because I'd love to just cook it on the bone." And we ended up doing that, and it was a very gnarly sort of looking dish. You'd have these big gnashing teeth looking up at you from the plate, and it was a very simple dish. It was sort of a karagi chicken style marinade, quickly flash fry with some, just some pickled chili and a fermented chili mayonnaise. And it went off. No one had ever done it before. And I think the Australian Traveller magazine came through at some point and actually named that dish in their World Top 20 in 2018, which was mind-boggling because it was a deep-fried ocean jacket snout, but just an incredible product down there, mate. I was able to shoot the venison for the menu myself. I'd handpicked the lambs in the stalls, like literally one of the most incredible experiences I think I've had as a chef.
You moved back to Queensland just at a time just before the dreaded COVID sort of landed and turned everything upside down. What was that like for you and your family?
Look, challenging as it was for pretty much everybody around the world, I think, mate, especially those in hospitality. I'd just taken a role as head chef at a place called Spice Bar in Mooloolaba about a month before COVID landed. And, it was, I went from working sort of 60 hours a week to working sort of 18 to 20 hours a week and really not knowing where we would go from there. And I think, the team worked really hard and the owners worked hard to keep the place going during those, very treacherous times. And we came out the other side, and we ended up sort of turning the place around a little bit and changed our offering on the menu there. And our 5 and 7 course degustations became our staple in that particular venue. But, it was, a very challenging time industry-wide, as you know. And, we saw across the country a lot of, iconic restaurants fall because of what was happening. And, whilst I would love to sit here and whinge and complain about how much money COVID cost me, at the end of the day, mate, I still had a job and we still came through the other side. So we're very fortunate.
It was an interesting period of time. I'm fascinated about your move, out of restaurants in a way and to Kilcoy. How did the job come about and what was the decision process and sort of like for you?
Mate, I'd got out of the kitchen probably 4 years ago. A good mate of mine is a builder on the Sunshine Coast. I could see that I was really wanting to spend more time with my family. And obviously being a chef on the Sunshine Coast, mate, your peak times on the sunny coast is weekends and school holidays, so they're the sort of times that you can't really take off because that's when the restaurant needs you the most. So I thought it's probably time for me to do something different. So I ended up going back to painting and decorating. I had my own business going and was really loving it, enjoying it. I was enjoying the time at home. I was enjoying running a business. And then literally I was in my garage washing some brushes out one day and I got a message from our friend Andy Herndon, who, Andy was doing my role basically. And as you know, he's become quite the superstar on social media. And he just said, mate, I need to take a step back from what I'm doing in this particular role to focus on YouTube, Instagram, all the rest of it. And he said, would you like my job? And I think initially I was like, yeah, I'm all right, man. I think I've mentally checked out of the kitchen and I'm happy doing what I'm doing. And he just said, look, why don't you come in, have a look, we'll have a chat. And so I came in and had a chat with Andy and I said, you know what, this is amazing. I'd be foolish to turn down such an opportunity. And here we are sort of 2.5 years later. And yeah, like I said, every day is different and I thoroughly enjoy what I get to do here every day.
It's the social media thing is fascinating. Its impact it's had on the industry, the positives and negatives. But you mentioned Andy, and he's now got millions of followers doing what he does. But more recently, you've been doing a lot of that sort of stuff. What's it like for you, sort of trying to create the right content and send the right message, for the brand and the beef as well? What's that world like for you,
mate? I really enjoy it. I think I'm not everybody's comfortable standing in front of the camera, and it is challenging. We work, our marketing team here, they and I, we work very closely with our sales guys, and we talk with them about what products are we trying to sell, what would you like us to promote, and so the three departments work in unison to come up with some ideas on what cuts, and then I'll go away and I'll design a few dishes, I'll trial a few of the dishes. And then, we'll go and print the run sheet for the day. And, it does take a while to really execute because it's a full day of prep prior. And then, some days, mate, we'll film 4, 5, 6, 7 dishes. So, it's not as glamorous as what it always looks like on camera. It is a lot of hard work, but it is also very rewarding. I actually was just having a look at some drafts this morning of a recent trip we did down to Melbourne. We spent a couple of days in the kitchen with Ian Curley at his new restaurant, 81 Bay. And I was just having a look at those drafts this morning. They came up really good, and it was great to get back in the kitchen with Curls. I met him in Port Lincoln. So, this place really takes me on some amazing adventures. But the social media, I think, is it's so important, I think, in this day and age, Huck, when you're trying to promote especially small restaurants that may not have a marketing budget. Social media is free, and if you can create the right content that grabs people's attention, then I think that's half the battle won.
Working, as we've discussed, very closely with beef these days, is there any sort of really standout sort of go-to tips or tricks that you use that people might not be aware of, or that are your go-to when it comes to beef in particular cut as well?
Look, mate, I think everyone that enjoys beef, they want to have a flavorful, tender steak, right? And a lot of people automatically think, oh, I fillet or ribeye or whatever else, which they are exceptional cuts of meat. But if you were to go to your local butcher and ask them for something like, a flat iron, which comes off the oyster blade, or even the thick skirt, like I mentioned before, a good old-fashioned hanger steak. It's probably, in my opinion, one of the most flavorful steaks on the animal. But also slow cooking these days as well. Slow cookers are very affordable. Most homes have one in this day and age. And you've got, cuts like, for me, my favourite cut of beef is the beef cheek. Again, very underrated, but just absolutely packed full of flavour, amazing texture and consistency. And there's enough information out there on the internet these days. If you want to, everything's on YouTube. You can Google how to trim and cook a beef cheek, right? And you can do it at home. So I think some people are afraid of buying beef at a butcher. I'm talking about the home cook here, because of how expensive a really nice steak could potentially cost them, and they're worried about stuffing it up or not doing it justice. But there's enough information out there for you these days to really, experiment around with, different cuts and find one that you enjoy. You might prefer a flat iron, mate. I might prefer an eye fillet. So, there's so many, and I know I've learned about different cuts since I worked with this company too, Huck. Like, there's certain cuts that I didn't even know existed, and I've been in kitchens for 25 years, so I've had to call Andy or jump on YouTube myself and just go, okay, well, how do I use this, or how do I use that? So the learning process never stops, and it's one of the things I really enjoy.
For someone that's made a move sort of to the side in regards to chefing, and it's not a common role that you have, what's some of the new skills that you've acquired, and do you have any advice for someone that might be wanting to sort of broaden their horizon in that way?
Advice would be, it's very important that you can work with, a lot of different departments, within a corporate business. You need to sometimes put your chef mindset and your chef attitude to the side, and really just work well and collaborate with different departments and understand what the sales department needs, or understand what the marketing team are trying to achieve, and really understand the end goal for the business. And obviously, someone like myself, I'm here for a reason, because I have a skill set that is required to really sort of help showcase and promote our products. But I think management's a little bit different in this particular scenario. I think I only manage sort of one staff member these days, as opposed to previously up to 30 or 40. So the management style is a lot different as well. But it's also, and for some chefs, mate, you also need to change your language. I'm in a corporate environment now. You're not standing over the stove shoulder to shoulder with your mates all day, every day. So, it's a huge learning curve, and it definitely has its challenges, as do every job. But, mate, I thoroughly enjoy it, and I'm very lucky to work where I do and with the people that I work closely with.
Well, Josh, it's amazing the move that you've made and the presence that you're also creating for yourself as well across the market. I can't wait to see what you do next. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Great. Thanks for your time, Huck. Really appreciate having you on the program. Good to talk to you.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Stay safe and be well.